Hey all, this is Neil. Welcome back to ASL Boot Camp. This is exercise 3, infantry movement, and we're going to start getting into the meat and potatoes of ASL, specifically infantry movement and infantry fire principles. But first, before I get started, I have a little housekeeping to go over. Um, One of them talks about the length of these episodes, these exercises. My initial intent was to have very short exercises, but clearly that's not working out. So instead, I'm going to try to group everything into similar topics. So infantry movement is this exercise. I'm going to go through inherit portage points, standard movement, double time, assault movement, and dash. I don't think I'm going to do bypass separately, but I'm going to group those all into one. I'm going to do similar with other videos. And then you can use the handy dandy chapter feature, which I've started using for my YouTube videos. If you look to the bottom side of the video, right around here, just under the video, there's a link that will show a text showing what chapter you're currently on. If you click on that, what will happen is over here on the right, a little window will pop up, and I'm talking about on a computer. I'm not sure how it reacts on mobile, for example, or tablets. But over here, another window should pop up, and it'll show all the chapters in this video, and you can just click on each of those subjects to pop to them. So if you want to skip ahead to double time movement, just click down here, window pops up, and click on the double time chapter, and it'll take you directly there. And same with the other sections in each video. Now, the other piece of housekeeping I want to talk about is an update I did to the overlay, informational overlay, right around up here. I added the player phases, color-coded player phases. And that'll be in all the videos going forward because we'll be referring to that a lot as we go through play examples and more rules, exercises, and discussions. And they're color-coded for a specific reason, and I'll talk to that in a later video when we actually get into movement, defensive first fire, and final fire, and we start moving through some of the early phases of a player turn. I'll talk about why they're colored for that specific reason. Okay. That's all I wanted to do for housekeeping. Now, you may have skipped housekeeping, hopefully not, because it gives you a little update of my thinking of how I'm putting these videos together. Let's jump into the next topic, which is going to be inherent portage points, abbreviated as IPP or just PP for portage points. Now, typically units on a battlefield, infantry on a battlefield, soldiers, they're lugging around equipment, ammunition, sometimes even their comrades, helping their comrades out. And that's reflected in the game in a term called portage points. Now, every support weapon has a portage point value, and no support weapon can be moved unless it's carried by an infantry. And each infantry unit has an inherent portage point capacity, how much they can carry. Now, first, before I do that, I should talk about what a support weapon is. Let me switch to my black here. Now, a support weapon is anything on a half-inch counter. And it can be portaged, such as a medium machine gun, which has, this is a German medium machine gun, it has 3 portage points. A gun is anything on a 5/8 inch counter, and guns cannot be portaged. They cannot be carried. They do not have portage point values on them. I should have pulled one out. But there's no portage point value, and they're on a larger counter. Guns can be manhandled, and that's a completely different subject from Chapter C, and it's a completely different process than porting a support weapon. So any piece of equipment that is on a half-inch counter and has a portage point number on it is a support weapon. Guns, larger counters, cannot be carried. They have to be manhandled, or they pretty much don't move the entire game. Okay. Let's go back to the concept of how bulky equipment is and how much portage a squad or a multi-man counter and a single man counter can carry. Now let me find one here. A multi-man counter, in this case a Russian. I'm going to be mixing up the nationalities as I go through these videos to give people a view of all the different types of nationalities and different units and the colors that each nationality is shown as. Get you used to that. So a squad can carry 3 portage points. Okay. I should say a multi-man counter, which a squad is a multi-man counter. A half squad is also a multi-man counter. It can also carry 3 portage points. And then a single man counter is a leader. It can carry 1 portage point. Okay. Now, units cannot combine portage points. In other words, if you have 3 multi-man counters in a hex, that does not mean they can carry something that has a support weapon that has 9 portage points, or one that has 5 without a penalty. Each one has an individual portage point number, and they can each carry individual support weapons. They can't combine portage points up, but a multi-man counter plus a single man counter, they can. That equals 4. So if you have a leader stacked with a squad, he can take his 1 portage point and add it to that squad, giving it 4 portage points. That's the only time you can combine portage points, allowing them to carry more equipment with less of a penalty. Now, let's pull up a support weapon here. A squad by itself could carry a light machine gun. Let's move this guy back down here. The squad can carry 1 machine gun is 1 portage point. He has 2 portage points left over, so he can carry 3 by himself. He can, in fact, he can carry 2 portage points. He can't fire both without losing his inherent firepower, but he can carry 2. In fact, he could carry, I don't have one out here. I don't have a third one out here. He could carry, I'll just use a German one. Let's pretend he captured one. Let's pretend he captured a German light machine gun. He could actually carry 3 portage points, 3 light machine guns by themselves. Now, he has 0 portage points. He can't carry anything else without invoking a penalty to his ability to move. Now, let's say he is lugging around a medium machine gun, which has 3 portage points. Still not a problem. Now, let's say he's lugging around a, where did I put it? Here it is. A Russian bulky heavy machine gun, which costs, hopefully you can see it here, costs 5 portage points. And he has 3 to spend. So the way it works is any portage points over your capability to carry is subtracted from your movement factors. So he's carrying 5 portage points. He can only carry 3. He's 2 over, which means he's going to lose 2 movement factors. So he's going to be 2 movement factors down. Now, if the leader was stacked with him, combined they have 4 portage points. These obviously change. 1 movement factor down. So he would lose 1 movement factor. He could only move, in this case, 5 movement he would have 5 movement factors because he's stacked with a leader. I spoke about that in a previous video. I should probably cover that now. So multi-man counters, excuse me if I'm jumping around a little bit, they have 4 movement factors. Squads and half squads. Single man counters, specifically leaders, they're the most common, have 6 movement factors. But if a single man counter and a multi-man counter, or multiple multi-man counters, so if I've got a leader stacked with a squad, a half squad, and I have another squad around here somewhere, 3 multi-man counters, and they start their movement phase stacked together, and they end their movement phase stacked together, the squads can also have 6 movement factors, which allows them to move further, and it allows them to potentially carry more and go a further distance. That's why I said if a squad is stacked with a leader, he also has 4. He can combine and have 4 portage points. The medium machine gun, sorry, the heavy machine gun is 5. They're 1 over, so they lose 1 movement factor. So a squad with a leader could move 5 movement factors. If there was no leader, he only have 4 movement factors. He'd be 2 over, and he can only go 2 movement factors, which is kind of brutal. Okay, so typically you want to have your heavy equipment stacked with a leader. Heavier equipment, support weapons are obviously more powerful. Light machine guns, heavy machine guns, and medium machine guns. So typically you want your leaders either stacked with or in the proximity of your heavier equipment, so you can move them more effectively. Okay. Now let's get into, that was inherent portage points. I believe I touched on everything. The key thing to remember is squads 3, leaders 1. They can combine for 4. For every portage point over your capability, whether you're with a leader or not, is subtracted from your movement factors. Okay. Now let's get into some actual standard movement. We'll do it without support weapons, and then we'll do it with support weapons. Let's leave up this reminder at the bottom that multi-man counters have 4 movement factors and single man counters have 6 movement factors, and if they're stacked together during the movement phase, a multi-man counter can also move 6. They get the leadership bonus to be able to move 6 movement factors. Now that doesn't necessarily mean they can move 6 hexes. Each hex, depending on terrain, has a movement factor cost. And I should distinguish between movement factor and movement point, which is important. Whenever you see movement factor in the rulebook or referred to, it's speaking to infantry movement. Whenever you see movement point in the rulebook, it's referring to vehicle movement. So there's a distinction there. So when you're reading rules section, you know that they're talking about either infantry moving or vehicles moving. So infantry is always movement factors. Now let's just start out with a lone squad here who has by himself 4 movement factors. Now I'm not going to get into too much detail on the terrain at this point. I tried to pick a board that had a variety of terrain, but nothing too complicated. I'm not going to get into the gully right now or the marsh, but it's got woods, grain, building, orchard, and a couple 2-level hills on it, and woods. I think I mentioned woods. Let's just say he's in this woods roads hex, and he wants to move in this direction. He has 4 movement factors. Open ground is 1 movement factor. So he could go, use my tweezers. I should get in the habit of using my tweezers. Let's just keep him in open ground and see how far he can go. He's got 4 movement factors. So he could go 1 before I start. Infantry can move any direction through any terrain, well, almost any terrain. There's some terrain that's impassable. They can move any direction at any time if the terrain allows it, up to the maximum of their movement factors. Okay, let me put another unit on here. Let's put them here. Now, infantry units, well, all units in Advanced Squad Leader have to take turns moving. So in other words, I couldn't move this guy and expend 3 movement factors, and then move this guy, expend 3, and then come back and move this 1 more for 4. A unit has to start its move, make its movement, and complete its movement before another unit can start. Now, if they're stacked, you can move them as a stack, and there's various philosophies on why you do and do that and don't do that. And I have my own, which I'll go into probably in defensive fire principles and movement. But if they start as a stack, they can move as a stack. They can also move as a stack, and one can stop, and the other one can continue. You can do things like that, but you can't alternate between moving infantry units or any unit in the game. So he's got 4 movement factors. This is moving through open ground. Pretty simple. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, if we were actually playing a game and there were enemy infantry that could see those hexes that had just moved through, they might take a shot while I'm making that move. Running through open ground is generally not the smartest thing to do unless you absolutely have to. In some situations, you obviously do. So that's 4 movement factors. Now let's go back, put him back here. Let's put him with a leader. Now he's got 6 movement factors. He starts the movement phase with a leader, and now he has more options. He could go. These aren't the same size. He could go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Orchard is cost 1, 6. He could go further now, or he could go. It was 4 back here. He could go 4, 5.5. Grain when it's in season is 1.5. He'd be at 5.5 there. You can't go anywhere else because none of these are a half movement factor, so he'd have to stop there. Now let's go back here. Let's say he's carrying this 5 Portage point medium machine gun. Now, their base movement factor, since they're stacked together, like I just said, is 6 combined, and their inherent portage capability, portage point capability is combined is 4, but they're carrying a medium machine gun, which I'm using air quotes, weighs 5 portage points, so they lose 1 movement factor from their 6, so they can move 5. So they could go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They'd have to stop there. Okay. Now let's go through some other terrain. Buildings. To enter a building, and this is totally exclusive of bypass movement. This is actually moving into the obstacle in the hexes, the woods, and the buildings, and the grain. So buildings are 2 to enter. Grain, when it's in season, is 1.5. Orchards are 1. Roads are 1. And I'm excluding any weather effects and snow as well. This is nice day, daylight, no weather implications. Moving up a hill is 2x the cost of the terrain. Whatever terrain is in the hex you're moving into, it's double that. So to go from this woods hex up there, crossing a crest line, this is a crest line, that would cost 2 movement factors. But to move up, crossing this crest line into this wood hex, that would cost 4. So that'd be 2, that'd be 4. So this unit here, if he didn't have the machine gun, if he started here with a leader, he could go 2, my tweezers, he could go 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and stop there. Going up hills costs quite a bit, especially when you're moving into other obstacles without using bypass. If he was over here, if he started here, he'd go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and he can continue on here to 6 because he's a leader stacked with a squad. Let's see, crossing hedges, crossing hex side obstacles like hedges and walls. So wall is +1. The hedge is also +1. So to do that, let's just move him over here into this orchard. Say he wanted to try to get to this building. He has 6 movement factors because he's with a leader. You go 1, 2 to get over the wall, 3 to enter the open ground hex, 4, 5, 6. So he can make it there. Open ground, road open ground, and then 2 for the building. Now, there is a bonus, an additional bonus you can leverage. If a unit starts in a road hex and travels his entire movement phase while on a road, he gets a 1 movement factor or 1 hex, 1 road hex road bonus. So let's say the squad and leader starts here and they're just going to try to get down the road as far as they can go. Okay, so they can go 1, 2, 3, 4. Now this is a little tricky here. They can't go to here. They have to enter the road. Is that 4, 5, 6? And that's their normal movement factors with leader stacked with a squad. And then since they traveled along a road the whole time, they get a bonus of 7. They'd have to stop there. So that's road bonus. Start on a road, travel on a road the entire time, and you get 1 movement factor bonus, which equates to 1 road hex bonus. Assuming there's no weather conditions involved as well. Okay, so I think that's covered the basics for squad movement, basic movement. Let's look at double time movement. Okay. Now, one quick thing I mentioned earlier in a different video, I think last video, inexperienced troops, which are green and conscript quality, they would have a G or a C up here in the upper right corner. They only have 3 base movement factors, so remember that. That's kind of important in some scenarios. Now, double time, I'm going to leave this up here. Is also known as CX or counter exhaustion. Counter exhaustion. Now, if the start of your movement phase, not the start of the movement phase, but the start of you moving either a unit or a stack of units, you declare double time. Let's put this guy back here on the road, or 2 squads and this leader. If I declare double time, I get 2 extra movement factors if I declare it before I start moving the unit or stack of units. So let's declare double time for this stack and see how far they can go. It's a leader stacked with a squad, so they have 6 movement factors. Declaring double time gets me 2 more, so they have 8 movement factors. So they could go 1, 2, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And there's a road bonus because I traveled all along the road. And then you would mark them with, let's see if I have one handy, a CX counter, meaning they're counter exhausted. And that stays on them for a full turn. So they go through the remainder of their player turn, the other player's turn, and then they get to the end, through their next prep fire phase, and then they can remove it. It's a reminder when you get into the next movement phase or the end of the prep fire phase that they double timed last turn, and it keeps units from double timing twice in a row. Okay, it's a rules reminder, but there's implications to being counter exhausted. Your inherent portage capacity is reduced by 1, and there are lots of various penalties, either negative if it's for your opponent, positive for you, to the die rolls. Mainly because your squad's tired. They just hauled butt down this road, double timing. They can't fire as well. They can't place smoke as well. They're more vulnerable to attacks. They're more vulnerable in close combat. So think carefully when you do this. And the other thing is if you somehow find yourself in a stack where, oops, where some of your units are counter exhausted, say these two are stacked here, and you fire, the unit that isn't counter exhausted also gets all the penalties of the counter exhausted unit. It carries over to that. So keep that in mind. It's good to travel across the board, cover some terrain, but it comes with some negative implications. There are no positives to going CX other than you get to move further, essentially. Now, if they were carrying, let's go back and put this medium machine gun on these guys. Okay. By the way, support weapons, the unit it's stacked on top of is the one that possesses it. It's moving back here, and I declare double time. You actually put the counter on, I'm sorry, you put the counter on right when you declare it, not afterwards, because your inherent portage capacity is reduced by 1 instantly as soon as you declare it. Now, every unit in the stack that declares double time, their inherent portage capacity is reduced by 1. Therefore, a multi-man counter plus a single-man counter, this is now 3. A single-man counter is, sorry, it's normally 3. That was with a leader. A squad's portage capacity goes down to 2, and a single-man portage capacity goes down to 0. So if you're CX, that means you can only carry, stacked with a leader, you can only carry 2 portage points when you double time. So this is a 5 portage point weapon. So they would lose 3 movement factors. So sometimes it's actually detrimental to declare double time if you're carrying too much stuff. You can get counter exhausted, but go just as far as if you had not declared double time. Now, if you're carrying less than 2, if you're carrying things like a demo charge or a light machine gun, probably a flamethrower, anti-tank rifle, the things that are very low portage point, the effect, it doesn't hit you until you go over 2. So you can haul butt when you're carrying light support weapons. You start carrying heavy support weapons, and it may not be any advantage to double timing. I think that's it for double time. What do I have next? Assault movement. Assault movement. Now, assault movement is an interesting one. It's a type of movement you do to minimize risk to your units. And the way it works is, I'm just going to go with a squad on this one. Let's get a German squad. Let's get a different color here. Let's have a squad there. And for some reason, he wants to move into here. Maybe there's a Russian unit over here, and he wants to move in here without using regular movement. Which, when I get into the fire principles, there are 2 things that can affect many things, but there are 2 really important things that can affect the die roll modifier. There's first fire non-assault movement, so which is a -1 penalty. If you do any type of normal move that isn't assault moving, there's a -1 to the die roll. And then there's moving in the open, which is bad. There's really no cover. This is the first fire non-assault movement part of it, which means you're taking risk while you're moving. If you're just moving, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? You're not haphazardly, but you're not taking advantage of cover as you move. Now, assault move involves moving one hex, but the kicker is when you move that one hex, you cannot expend greater than or equal to your current movement factor capability. In the case of just a squad, it would be 4. So if I assault move from here to here, that costs 2. So that would be legal to do because it would have to be 3 or less because there's no leader stacked. Now, if I was here, if I wanted to assault move up this hill, which costs 4, I couldn't assault move because it would have to be 3 or less, and I have 4 movement factors. If I had a leader stacked with him, now he has 6 movement factors. He could assault move up that hill for 4 and stop there. Now, in all the cases where you do assault movement, there is no -1 die roll modifier on the attacker for first fire, non-assault movement during the movement phase when the defender fires at you while you're moving. Okay, so that's the reason why you'd want to use assault movement, and you have to make sure that you are moving into terrain that allows you to not exceed your normal movement factor, current movement factors, either stacked with a leader or by your lonesome. Okay. Then finally, last thing I'm going to cover is dash, which is another special case. It's probably exactly as you imagine it to be, and you can only do it in certain situations. Let's see if I can find a good place on the board to. I'll put it. Yeah, let's try this. Okay, it's the Germans' movement phase, and they want to get over to this woods hex here. Now, just for the purposes of illustration, I'm going to move in a way that I wouldn't move in a game. Normally, you would go here and here because the Russian unit has no line of sight here because it's blocked by the wall. But in this case, I am going to declare a dash to P6. And the only way a dash can be declared is if you start in you declare a dash and you haven't expended any movement factors for that unit yet. You are in a non-open ground hex. You dash across a road location into a non-open ground hex. That's the only way you can declare a dash. I can't declare a dash going from here to here across this road. Well, you might be able to get away with it because there's some specifics about the definition of open ground. If a Russian unit was here, for example, I couldn't do it because that would be defined as me moving into open ground. But I'm getting ahead of myself again. And further, the move cannot exceed your movement factors. So in this case, it's 1, 2, 3, and I could declare a dash across that road. Now, even though this Russian unit has a line of sight to that hex, even though that appears to be open ground, I mean, the terrain feature is open ground, it is in fact not open ground because when this Russian unit fires on it, there is positive modifiers to the die roll. There's 2 in this case. There is the hindrance of the grain and the +1 modifier for the wall because I'm behind a wall. This hex side is on the hex that I'm traveling through. Therefore, technically, this is not an open ground by the definition. So I could dash from here to here. Now, the implications of dash for the player on defensive fire who might want to choose the first fire on that is it's area fire, meaning they fire at half firepower. So in other words, I'm sitting in this building. They know I'm there, but they don't know when I'm going to move or where I'm going to move. And I suddenly declare a dash. My guys just rip ass across the street here, across the road into these woods. These guys may not have been expecting it. They're firing through grain and the wall here, and they essentially are firing at half firepower at that hex if they choose to fire. So dash is really only useful in close-in fighting in cities and villages where there are either buildings or woods, or hexes with blocked line of sight on either side of a road that allows you to dash across things like that. And any firepower that goes into that hex is that have firepower. I don't use dash that often, but I don't really find myself in big city close quarters type of combat. I imagine in things like historical modules like a red barricades, red factories, dash is used all the time. They're running, you know, through a hail of bullets from one side of the street to the other, through buildings. I think that's it. I'm sure I probably mucked up a few things here and there, but it gives you a high level understanding of what portage points are, how standard movement works. Pretty simple. Movement factors, hexes causes movement factors to enter. Let me show you one thing real quick. Let me get out my rat chart. I'm going to use the rat charts instead of the bigger MMP charts because it fits on here nice. So here are basically the terrain costs for all the terrain. I think this is this one page. There's another page. Yeah, another. So there's 3 pages at least on this format. And we're talking about infantry. So here's all the infantry costs and all the notes involved. And then there's cavalry, horse, motorcycle, armored car, fully tracked, half tracked, truck, etc. So there's a lot of terrain. Obviously, I did not cover. I just covered the basics. But movement, infantry movement is fairly simple to get down and to remember all the movement factor values for the terrain. And then I did double time movement. It's the ability for units to move a little bit further at a penalty that sticks with them essentially a full game turn. So keep that in mind. Assault movement, which is the move of 1 hex as long as you don't exceed your current movement factor value and you don't receive the penalty of non-assault movement if anyone first fires against you while you move. Then lastly, a dash, which is the ability to dash across the road from one non-open ground hex across the road into another non-open ground hex, which doesn't necessarily have to be a buildings or woods. It could be a hex that it could be an open ground hex that you start in, but the line of sight to it is blocked and no one can see you do it. That's still a legal dash. That's it for infantry movement. Use the chapters. They're broken up by subject so you can navigate around very easily. Next time, I'm going to cover bypass movement. So it's essentially the same way mechanics of movement, but it allows you to move around things such as, say I want to go through this hex. I don't have to go through the building. I can go around it. And it costs me less and I can move farther. But there are a lot of line of sight implications and defensive fire implications with that involving vertices instead of line of sight to vertices instead of line of sight to center dots. So we'll get into that next time. Let me do my customary roll. I have the Russian dice out. I know it's going to be snake eyes. 6. See you next time.